We continue now at the top of Daf Tzadi Gimel Amud Beis in Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 93b. The Gemara asks, Hasu Lamali, why does the Mishnah need to say anything further? And Rashi explains the question, Hasu Lamali lemisni einaton kibus elosh and eskabel bekli. The Mishnah says that the only time the garment needs to be washed is if the blood of the chatos was received in a vessel and then it got on the garment. Then we say that the garment needs to be washed, otherwise it doesn't. But why do you need to write that in the Mishnah? Hatana le nishbach ala ritz, but already says in the Mishnah that if it spills on the floor, then that kind of blood does not require that the garment be washed. So why does it essentially repeat the same thing by saying that it has to be neskabel bekli, by saying that it has to be received in a vessel? And the Gemara answers, matam ka'amar. The way to understand the Mishnah is saying what is the reason. The Mishnah is giving the reason, meaning matam nishbach al haritzba va'asafo ein ton kibo. What's the reason? If it spills on the floor and then it's gathered up, that if that blood gets on a garment, the garment doesn't need to be washed. It's because the only time that washing is required is if the blood was received in a vessel and it is fit for hazah, it is fit for application, for sprinkling. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, roi lahazah, it has to be fit for sprinkling. Lemu'ute mai, what does that come to exclude? The Gemara says, lemu'ute kibel pachos michtei hazaya bechlize upachos michtei hazaya bechlize. Let's say he receives the blood, but he receives too little. It's not the minimum shear. It's not enough of a shear for hazaya, for sprinkling. So it's less than the shear in this vessel and less than the shear in that vessel. And we're coming to say that in such a situation, as Rashi says, kibel pachos michtei hazaya bechlize v'chazer v'irav, then he goes ahead and he combines those bloods. That would not be considered fit for hazah, even though now it is the requisite shear. But since the way it was received in the vessels was less than the shear, each shear had less than the requisite amount, therefore again it is not considered roi lahazah. And the Gemara continues, the Tanya is learned in a brayso, Rabbi Chalafta bar Shaul Omer, Rabbi Chalafta bar Shaul says, Kidesh, this is talking, when we talk about Kidesh, we're talking about the mechatos, that's the waters of purification, but we're saying that's the same as the blood. Kidesh pachos michtei hazai bechlizeh, if he sanctifies less than the amount of sprinkling in this vessel, upachos michtei hazai bechlizeh, and less than the amount of sprinkling in that vessel, lo Kidesh, again it will not be sanctified in such a situation. You can't combine them in order to create the shear. It has to be sanctified the proper amount in one vessel. And the Gemara continues, they had the following question, Bidam Mahu, what is the halacha by blood? Now we just said the halacha by blood up above, so Rashi explains, Bidam Mai Gabe Chatos HaPnimis. Here the Gemara's question is specifically by the blood of the inner chatos. Kibel Pachos Michtei Hazah, the same question. Let's say by the inner chatos, the person received less than the amount in one vessel and less than the amount in the other, V'chazer v'irav, and then mixes it together, Mihave Kabola Olo. Is that a proper acceptance of the blood by that kind of blood or not? That's the question. Mahu, what's the halacha? And the Gemara explains the sides of the question. On the one hand, hilchasahi, we could say the whole thing by mechatos is a halacha l'moshe misinai, and therefore umehilchasa lo gamin, you can't learn from something that's halacha l'moshe misinai because there's no reason, so to speak, for it. Therefore, you can't learn to another situation. O dilma, or maybe hasa mai taima, over there by the mechatos. What's the reason? Dechsiv, because it is written in the pasuk. It says v'taval b'mayim, he has to dip in the water, and so hachanami ksiv v'taval badam. Here also it uses the same language. It says v'taval badam. Rashi explains, V'taval b'mayim, mita korinan b'mayim, v'lo korinan b'mayim. And we'll take a look at the Shinuya Nuschos. Shinuya Nuschos says, from the fact that it is read b'mayim, v'lo korinan b'mayim, from the fact that it's with a patach b'mayim, that's what the Gemara is learning out from. Again, from the fact that it says b'mayim and not b'mayim, mashma b'mayim hanizkarim l'mala. That's understood as the water that was mentioned earlier, le'inyan kiddush, in terms of sanctification, meaning sheyehei b'shas kiddush shir tefillah, that at the time of the sanctification, it should have the requisite shear. And hachanami haksiv v'taval hakoyin esetzbo badam, it says esetzbo badam sheyehei badam harishon. Again, in that first blood, there should be shear tefillah mitchilah, so there should be the proper amount in terms of the dipping in order to dip the finger to apply the blood. And over here also, the Shinuya Nuschos says we're learning from badam. It says badam with a patuch, and therefore again we learn from there that it has to have the minimum shear. So those are the two sides of the question. Do we say it's halach l'moshe misinai by the mechatos and we can't learn from there, or do we say no, it's learned from the fact that it says v'taval b'mayim and it says v'taval badam, and so we're going to be able to learn from the mechatos to the case of the blood of the inner chatos. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here the following proof. The Amar Rabbi Zreika, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Zreika says that Rabbi Elazar says, Af bedam lo kidesh, that also when it comes to the blood, we say that it's not sanctified, meaning it is the same as the mechatos, you have to have that minimum shear. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Tanya, we learned in a Braisa, V'taval, it says that he dips, v'lo mesapeg. When it says that he dips, it has to be that he's dipping his finger, not that he's like rubbing his finger against the side of the vessel to get the blood. And bedam, what do we learn from that? Ad shehei badam shir tvila, you have to have enough blood, minimum shear, to be able to dip the finger. Me'ikaro, from the outset, you can't combine from various vessels. And min hadam, it says min hadam, it means min hadam shebe'inyan, it means from the blood of this topic, and we'll see in the Gemara what exactly that means. Rashi explains what's mesapeg, mekanech b'shulei hakli. That means, let's say, the Kohen rubs his finger on the bottom of the vessel to get the blood. Obedof nosav, or against the walls of the vessel. That would be no good. He has to be able to dip his finger into the blood. And sheyehei bedam shir tvila meikara garsinan, you have to have the minimum shear from the outset. Kedefarishus bedam harishon mashman, has to be the original blood. You can't combine in order to get the shear. And then min hadam, vihiza min hadam, it says vihiza min hadam, that means shebe'inyan, which Rashi explains, midam ha'amor be'inyan, from the blood that is mentioned, tvila shehiza mimena rishona yazes kulan. What that means is, the original, when he dips his blood and sprinkles, that's how he should do all of them. Meaning, shetzarech lachzor v'litvol bo etzbo al kol hazaya. The point is, he's got to dip his finger every time he's going to apply that blood. Al kol hazaya tvilo v'lemuute shirayim shebe'etzba. That comes to exclude, let's say there's a little blood left on his finger, so he wants to do the other sprinkling from the blood that's left on his finger. He says, I don't need to dip again. No, he does need to dip again. Dehai min hadam kro yaseruhu, the word min hadam, the words min hadam are extra. The lo tzarech lemichtav, it's not necessary to write those words. Ela v'hiza zayin pamim, it could have just said he sprinkles 7 times. When it says min hadam, again, it means every single time he has to dip his finger. And the Gemara continues and explains, v'itzrich lemichtav badam, it has to say badam. The ikasav rachmana v'taval, because if it just said v'taval, again, we're learning from v'taval v'lo mesapeg, and badam is that there has to be shir tvila meikaro. So if it just said v'taval hav amina, then one might have thought, afal pita leko shir tvila meikaro, even if you didn't have the minimum shir from the beginning. Kasav rachmana badam, that's why the pasuk says badam. Because of rachmana badam, and if it just said badam, hav amina afila mesapeg, one might think it would even be good enough to wipe the finger on the vessel. You don't have to dip the finger. Kasav rachmana v'taval min hadam, that's v'taval, so the pasuk says v'taval, he has to dip. And min hadam shebe'inyan lemu'utei mai, as Rashi already explained, but what does it mean that it has to be the dam shebe'inyan, min hadam shebe'inyan? What is that coming to exclude? Amar Rava says lemu'utei shirayim shebe'etzba. That comes to exclude if there was anything left on the finger, you can't use that. The finger has to be dipped again. And the Gemara says to that, Messiah l'Rebbe Elazar, this is a support for Rebbe Elazar. The Amar Rebbe Elazar says, Shirayim shebe'etzba psulin, whatever remains on the finger, that is disqualified, that cannot be used for sprinkling. Amar le Ravin bar Ravada l'Rav, Ravin bar Ravada said to Rav, Amar Talmidcha, Amar Rav Amram, your student said that Rav Amram said, Tanina, we learned in a Braisa against what Rebbe Elazar just said above. It says in the Braisa, Hayamaza v'nitza hazah miyado. Let's say he's sprinkling and the hazah leaves his hand. Ad shalohiza, until he sprinkles, ton kibus. So then kibus is required. You have to wash any garments that get that blood on them. But mishahiza, but when he's already sprinkled, ain ton kibus, then the garments do not require washing. And the Gemara wants to understand, what exactly does this Braisa mean? What is the difference between ad shalohiza and mishahiza? My love, is it not hachi kamar? The Braisa means to say as follows: ad shalo gamar milahazos, before he finished doing all of the sprinkling, so then ton kibus, so then kibus is required. Then the garments have to be washed. But misha gamar lahazos, but once he finished all of the sprinkling, so ain ton kibus, so then washing the garments is not required. And Rashi explains, Amar of Amram Tanina to Yuftal Rebbe Elazar. Of Amram says that we have a Braisa against Rebbe Elazar. Hayamaza bechatos hapnimios, he's sprinkling by the inner chatos. V'nitza hazah miyado al habeged. And what the Braisa is saying is that some of that blood, it sprinkles from his hand onto the garment. Now, ad shalo gamar kol ha'azos, if that happened before he finished all of the applications of the blood, all of the sprinklings, ton kibus, so then kibus is required. The garment has to be washed. meaning va'afilu nitas bein hazah lahazah mishirayim shebe'etzba. The understanding initially is that even, let's say, there's some blood left on his finger, and between the various sprinklings it goes from his finger onto the garment, and alma, we see shirayim shebe'etzba ksherin, we see that the shirayim, that blood remaining on the finger, must technically be kosher for hazah, the ipsulim, because if it was disqualified for hazah, my ton kibus, why would kibus be required? And so therefore it seems from this brisa that one can use the remaining blood on the finger for the hazos. And the Gemara says, lo, no, that's not the meaning of the brisa. Hachi kamar, what the brisa actually means is as follows: Ad shelo yotzta hazah miyado, before it leaves his hand, ton kibus. Then we say kibus is required. But misha yotzta hazah miyado, when it leaves his hand, ain ton kibus, then kibus is not required. And Rashi explains, Ad shelo yotzta miyado, meaning misha taval, from the moment he dips his finger, ton kibus, so then kibus is required. But misha yotzta hazah miyado, meaning once it leaves his hand, la'achar tvila, after the tvila, to have luhu shirayim be'etzba, meaning when it is shirayim be'etzba, ein ton kibus, that's when kibus is not required. Understanding the brisa in this fashion, it's saying exactly what Rebbe Elazar was saying. It's saying once he sprinkles the blood, so the blood left his hand, now whatever is left on his finger, that is not considered blood that can be used for azah, and therefore ein ton kibus. And when it says again that ad shelo yotzta miyada, what that means is misha taval, when he dips his finger, but he hasn't sprinkled anything yet, so that is good blood for hazah, and therefore that would require kibus. And the Gemara continues, Esvei Abaya, Abaya asks a question, this is from a Mishnah in Meseches Para, Gomer milahazos, if he finishes the sprinkling of the blood of the Para Aduma, so then at that point the remainder of the blood that's on his hand is not fit for sprinkling, so mekaneach yado begufa shel para, then he wipes his hand on the body of the cow, because the blood is going to get onto the body of the cow, and it's all going to be burned together. And the Gemara says, Gomer in, that sounds like he has to finish all of the sprinklings, then yes, but lo Gomer lo, but if he doesn't finish, then apparently he doesn't wipe the blood off, because that blood that's on the finger is still fit for sprinkling. That goes against what we said above. Rashi explains, Gomer milahazos b'Meseches para tananla. This is a Mishnah in Para. Gomer milahazos zayin hazos. He finishes all 7 sprinklings of the blood. Shemaza b'haramishcha keneged pischo shel heichel. He would sprinkle on haramishcha towards the entrance of the heichel. Kedechsiv el nochach pnei ol moed, like it says in the pasuk el nochach pnei ol moed. Mekaneach yado begufa shel para. So when he's totally done, he wipes his hand on the cow. Sha'af dama ton sreif, because the blood also needs to be burned. Kedechsiv, like it's written in the pasuk, as orav, as besarav, as dama al pirsha yisrof. It says it's all burned together, including the blood. And so therefore, again, this seems to be saying that the remainder of blood, when he hasn't finished all of the hazos, when he hasn't finished the 7 sprinklings, apparently that is fit for sprinkling, even though it's a remainder on his finger. And the Gemara continues, Amar lei, he said back to him, Rava responded to Abaya. We should point out over here that some have the girsa of l'Rava up above in the Gemara, and so here Rava is responding to Abaya. Gamar, the way to understand the Mishnah is as follows: if he finishes all the applications, mekaneach yado begufo shel para, then he wipes his hand on the body of the cow, as we said. Lo gamar, if he doesn't finish all of them, mekaneach etzbo, so then he wipes his finger, and again that would imply that that which is on the finger is not fit for hazah, and that's why it has to be wiped off. But the Gemara asks on this, Bishlama Gamar mekaneach yado begufo shel para, I understand if he finishes everything, he wipes his hand on the cow. Shenemar v'saraf es hapara le'enav, it says that the cow is going to be burned, and so he wants to wipe off that blood onto the cow and burn it all together. Elo etzbo, but when it comes to the finger, b'mai mekanech, what's he going to wipe the finger on? And the point is, if he wipes the blood off on the cow, he's going to get the hairs of the cow on his finger, and he won't be able to do the subsequent sprinklings of the blood. And so the Gemara says to that, Amar Abaya, Abaya says, Bisfas Mizrak, what he does is, he wipes off his finger on the edge, on the lip of the basin, Kedechsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, Kipore Zav, it says Kipore Zav, and Rashi explains, Kipore Zav, Gabe Klisharis Ksiv, this pasuk is written by Klisharis b'Sefer Ezra, and Sefer Ezra, Vehein Mizrakin, and this refers to the basins, V'al Shem Shemekaneach Bo Etzbo, and since he wipes his finger, the word Kipore can be a reference to that, Kari Len Kipore, Lashon V'chipar Yodei Dener and Kesar, they're also the idea of wiping, and so therefore he can wipe his finger on the lip of the basin. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Nites ala or, let's say the blood from a carbon chatas, it sprays onto the hide of an animal. Ad shelo hufshet, if it's before the hide is flayed from the animal, eino ton kibbutz, so then washing is not required. But misha hufshet, but once it's flayed from the animal, ton kibbutz, so then washing is required. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Rabbi Elazar says, af misha hufshet, even when it is flayed from the animal, still the kibus is not going to be required according to Rebbe Lozer. And the Mishnah continues, Einoton kibus ela makom hadam, when you have to wash a garment, it's only the area where the blood is. V'davar shu roi lekabel tumah, and it has to be something which can be makabel tumah, v'roi lekibus, and it has to be something that is able to be washed. And echad habegad v'echad hasak v'echad ha'or, whether it's a regular garment, whether it's sackcloth, whether it's hide, tu'un and kibus, washing is required. V'hakibus b'makom kadosh, washing has to be done in a sacred place, meaning in the Azara. Ushviras klicheres b'makom kadosh, also the breaking of an earthenware vessel, which let's say the chatos was cooked in, that has to be b'makom kadosh. Umarika ushtifa b'chlina choshas b'makom kadosh, and the scouring and rinsing, that's the halacha by copper vessels in which the chatos is cooked in, that has to be in a holy area. And zeh chomer b'chatos mi kodshei kadashim, this is a stringency by chatos over kodshei kadashim, over the other more holy types of karbanos. Rashi explains, Ad shelo hufshet ein ton kibus. Again, if it was not flayed, then kibus is not required. That's what Rabbi Yehuda said. Taima mefarish beGemara. The reason for this will be explained in the Gemara. Tibo'inon roi lekabel tumah below chesron malacha. It has to be fit to be makabel tumah with no malacha that's lacking. Nothing has to be done to it in order that it's makabel tumah. And then Rabbi Lozer said, Af mi shehufshet, even when it is flayed, in such a situation, kibus is not required. Kolzman shelo niskan lios kli. What Rabbi Lozer is saying is, as long as it hasn't been fixed to become a vessel, ein ton kibus. It does not require washing. To be on davar hamakabel tumah she'ein mechusra afilu machshava. Davar hamakabel tumah, according to Rabbi Lozer, means that it can't be missing even intention. That's what it means. It has to be set up to be a vessel. And then the Mishnah said, Elam makom hadam velo kol habeged. You don't have to wash the whole garment, just where the blood is. Davar haroi lekabel tumah, and again it has to be something that is fit to be makabel tumah. V'afa pisha mechusar machshava, even if it's lacking the intention of what it's going to be used for. Uvilvad shelo yehei mechusar malach, as long as it's not lacking any actual work. Ustamak Rabbi Yehuda. This part of the Mishnah follows Rabbi Yehuda. V'roi lekibus beGemara mefarish lemuutei mai. When it says it's fit for washing, the Gemara will say what that comes to exclude. B'makom kadosh, it has to be washed in a sacred place. That's ba'azara, in the azar, in the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. Ushviras klicheres, there's halach breaking earthenware vessels. Shabishel ba'chatos, if a chatos was cooked in an earthenware vessel, b'makom kadosh, that has to take place. The breaking of it has to be in a makom kadosh. Uvegemara yalef lan, the Gemara will learn this out. And then finally the Mishnah said this is a stringency by chatos zechomer akibus kai. This is specifically going, the stringencies we're referring to here are talking about the stringency by washing of the garment. And the Gemara says, Minohani mili, from where do we know this? The Tanu Rabbanon, because the rabbis taught beged. It says in the pasuk that this halacha applies by a beged. We'll take a look at the full pasuk. The pasuk says, "Kol asher yiga bevasar yikdash v'asher yiza midama al habeged asher yiza alad techabes b'makom kadosh." So again, the pasuk it refers to a beged. Ein li el beged. I only know this applies by a beged. Rashi will say a beged in general is tzemer upishtim. That's if it's wool or linen. But minayin l'rabos or mishahufshet. From where do we know to include even a hide which was flayed from the animal? Talmud lomer asher yiza alad techabes. It says asher yiza alad techabes, which is an inclusion. Yachol shanimar be'or ad shelo hufshet. One might think we even include a hide which was not flayed from the animal. Talmud lomar beged. It says beged ma beged haroi lekabel tumah. Just like a beged is fit to receive tumah, avkol haroi lekabel tumah. So too it has to be something, anything which is fit to be makabel tumah. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Lozer says beged. Again, it says in the pasuk beged. Ein li ala beged. I only know a beged. Minayin l'rabo sak. From where do we know to include sackcloth? Rashi explains, "Ma beged haroi lekabel tumah." Just like a beged is fit to be makabel tumah, de'en loch beged katan sheshmo beged. There's not even a small garment is not called a garment. She'ein haroi lekabel tumah. If it's not fit to be makabel tumah, if it's a beged, it's able to be makabel tumah. Em chishev olav lekli kamos shu. As long as the person had intention that it should be used in this way as a vessel. Af kol, so to everything. V'or mishahufshet, and once the hide is flayed from the animal, roi lekabel tumah, it's fit to receive tumah. Im chishev olav le'avda. If that's what he had intention for, Kemoshi, if he was going to use it as is, Avol Kozman Shalo Hofshet Eino Roy Lekli. But if it wasn't flayed from the animal, it's not fit to be like a vessel. Ainli Ella Beged Stam Begodim Shebetorah Tzemer Pishtim. Again, in general, when it says Beged in the Torah, when it says Begodim in the Torah, it refers to Tzemer and Pishtim. It refers to wool and to linen. And Sak refers to Minotza Shalizim. That's from the hair of goats. That's what's called sackcloth. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tzadi Dalid Amid Aleph.